In a young person in their 30s who was paralyzed from a neck injury, they took his own fat stem cells, injected his fat stem cells into his spinal cord right where it was broken. And guess what? It grew new spinal cord, and pretty soon he started to be able to move his arms and his legs. Unbelievable. Genistein found in plant-based foods like they could cut off the blood supply, feeding cancers. A lot of these anti-androgenic substances like curcumin or like genistein, the catechins, and they also directly help to manipulate our body to be able to burn body fat. When you get into your 40s and 50s and 60s, it's not natural that we start gaining weight and our metabolism slows down. 60 can be the new 20 if we let one of the things of some really, really brilliant cardiologists did is they were wondering, could we be borrowing those stem cells from body fat and using them somewhere else? Because stem cells are what we call context dependent. So if they're in fat, they'll make more fat, but if they're in another tissue, they'll make other tissues. So the cardiologist asks, what if you put them in a heart? All right. So can you imagine a cardiologist working with a plastic surgeon? Plastic surgeon does liposuction, sucks out the fat, all right? Now, what do you do with this? Can this jar of liposuction fat? I'll tell you as a researcher, I'll kind of like take away all the mystery on this. You put a little enzyme in there. Enzyme kind of dissolves the fat up. It releases the cells separates the cells from the fat. You put it in something called a centric. It spins around, all right? And when round and round she goes, and what happens is that the stem cells go to the bottom of the tube and the fat floats to the top of the tube as fat should. And then when you stop the tau spinner, you pour off the fat, and now you got a tube with stem cells at the bottom. The plastic surgeon hands this tube to the cardiologist who takes these stem cells, puts it in a catheter, okay, and then snakes it through your growing up into your heart of somebody who has heart disease and pops it right into the heart. So now stem cells from your fat go into your heart, and guess what happens? It grows new heart tissue. It grows blood vessels to feed the heart. Amazing. Not ready for prime time yet. This is discitmol inject in your knee kind of stem cell. This is like I've been involved with this. I'm still involved with it. It's amazing to see some of the early success. Not ready for prime time yet. Okay, there's a lot more work that needs to be done, but amazing. So, one of the things I wanted to write about in the book, though, to show you just how powerful this is. I didn't want to talk about the hard part of it. This was my jaw dropper when I looked at it. Somebody did the same process of taking out liposuction fat, separating those stem cells in a young person, their 30s, who was paralyzed from a neck injury, quadriplegic, can't move their arms, can't move their legs, paralyzed, game over, right? In terms of, it's a whole lifetime, 30 years, a lifetime of disability, a serious disability. So this was a patient in a clinical trial where they took his own fat stem cells and put them in a brand new place. They took him out of his fatties, isolated him, and injected his fat stem cells into his spinal cord right where it was broken, severed. And guess what? It grew new spinal cord, and pretty soon He started to be able to move his arms and his legs. Yeah, unbelievable. So stem cells reside in fat, absolutely powerful. And so you can't be removing those stem cells, but there are certain foods you can eat that can actually prevent or slow down those stem cells from cloning themselves into a new brand, new fat. So there's a dietary way to control it as well. You don't have to remove it and give them to another doctor. You can actually eat foods that will actually contain it. Things like olive oil has a substance called hydroxyl, slows down adipose-stromal stem cells from growing and cloning themselves. Marine omega-3 fatty acid you find in seafood or dietary supplements will also do the same thing. Lycopene, found in tomatoes. Okay. A watermelon, as example, which is all lycopene, will actually kind of reprogram the stem cells to basically say, you know what, if you're thinking about making more fat, don't do it. Goji berries also can actually reprogram stem cells. And goji berries, it's amazing. It's one of those continuum, you hear these days, you hear a lot about these medical foods that have been used in Asia for years, like cordyceps, mushrooms, which I saw in the marketplace the other day. It's really cool. But goji berries are something very common as an herbal medicine. And I think that one of the things that we need to remember is that when we're borrowing and exploring fascinating food substances that have been used traditionally for thousands of years as medicine, in other cultures, we should be just a little cautious that this doesn't mean that we can just be playing around with the substance. But goji berries, which I love to put goji berries in tea. If you mix it, goji berries with tea, put a date, a dried date in there, put some chrysanthemum flower in there, you kind of create this really nice herbal tea. You can put oolong tea or black tea, so you can actually find ways to extract some of these natural substances. Goji berries have bioactives like lutein and zeaxanthin, which is good for your vision, but some of these substances also reprogram your fat stem cells as well. In the late 1980s, I was super interested in finding ways to fight cancer by cutting off the blood supply. So I worked in a lab, and we were looking at before pharmaceuticals were developed, biopharmaceuticals were developed. For this area, we're looking for natural sources, and we're looking for anything in nature that could give us a clue of how nature might provide a natural chemical that could cut off the blood supply to cancers. Now we knew, actually, even back then, like licorice could do its stuff, and licorice could actually cut off the blood supply to tumors. I'm actually talking about licorice, and it turns out that there's a natural chemical found in licorice called isolicritrin. All right, Now, as a researcher, one of the things that we're able to do is to know something's in a natural compound, take it out, and test it in the lab. We tested isolitrin on blood vessels that are grown to feed harmful cells like tumor blood vessels, and it actually powerfully stopped those extra blood vessels. But the thing that really brought it home for me, and I've never forgotten this, is a research study that was done by a Greek researcher working in Switzerland. His name was Ted Fosis, and he looked at the urine of villagers outside of Kyoto, Japan. These villagers were all vegetarians. They ate mostly soy, okay? And then he had frozen jars of this urine, and his boss, his supervisor said, go find something interesting to do with the urine or toss it out. So he went to look for hormones inside the urine, thinking that he was an endocrinologist. So he was interested looking at hormones when he ran the urine underneath this thing called a mass spectrometry. Okay, you see these spikes, and he found a wildut spike that didn't belong in the human, and it only came from the soybean, and it was a spike of gene 9. So he cut out that spike, which we can do in the lab, and he tested it on blood vessels that would be feeding cancer. It immediately stopped those blood vessels from growing. And so this was to discover that GINA found in plant-based foods like soybeans could actually be anti-androgenic, and they could cut off the blood supply feeding cancers. Really was a mind-blowing discovery. And I read this, and I know Ted Fosis. We had this conversation about it, and it was absolutely amazing to think about what other secrets might be in food that could help to control the blood vessels. Now remember earlier we talked about the fact that growing fat needs extra blood vessels, right? So it's trying to grow those blood vessels. If you deliberately cut off the blood vessels to that are feeding fat, all right, it'll actually shrink the tumors, and it also shrink tumors, and it also shrink fat. So although the tumor wants to grow more blood vessels, and it can't, so it starts to die in the middle. If you then step in and do an intervention to really cut off the blood vessels, that fat mass will shrink. And this has been shown very conclusively in the lab that this can actually happen. Green tea, another, pecatecans, EGCG, powerful anti-androgenic, can cut off the blood supply feeding, tumors can cut off the blood supply feeding fat as well. So one of the reasons I really came up to this whole idea of body fat is not only my background in this research, thinking about, well, maybe fat growing the way that we talked about, cloning itself, getting bigger and bigger and bigger, hypoxic in the middle. That to me resembles a tumor exactly. And so the question is, could we tame the tumor by taming the blood supply? And I remembered the work that was done earlier, and it turns out that many of the foods that I wrote about my first book that are anti-ang and androgenic, my first book being Eat to Beat Disease, more than 300 foods. There's a whole chapter on anti-androgenic cancer, starving foods, or blood vessel taming flu food foods. And I started to realize here was this whole opportunity to look at ways of taming our body fat as well. In the epidemiological study, turmeric chemical called curcumin, and again, I'm a scientist, so leave the tongue twisters to me. But just know that we've actually discovered some of the specific bioactives that are in these foods, powerful, anti-androgenic. But, a lot of these anti-androgenic substances like curcumin and turmeric, or like genin and soy, or the Kakans inti, as it turns out, they also directly help to manipulate our body to be able to burn body fat, which is really interesting. So this is sort of like multiple job descriptions, multitaskers. That's the amazing thing that research is discovering. Like I study food is medicine. Now food is medicine. Now food is medicine. Now suit is medicine. Just like medicine, oh, wait a minute. It actually can help to thin your blood and actually helps to, prevent heart attack and that kind of stuff. So we're beginning to rediscover that in Mother Nature's pharmacy with an F, not a PH, that what she has imbued in the foods, the whole foods that we have are all these natural chemicals that have multiple tasks in our body. And when it comes to food and health, it's not just about the food. It's about how our body responds to what you put inside it and what those chemicals are actually activating those pathways, the domino effects that they trigger once we actually eat them. And some of the foods that actually cut off the blood supply. Too fat and cancers also turn on the engine of our metabolism to burn down harmful body fat. Many of the foods that are associated with high antioxidant properties, right? These are phytochemicals. These are phyphenols, polyphenols, all actually are able to assist us. I mean, we talked about some of them already. Green tea, actually, wonderful antioxidant properties, but it's really, think about it, less as what you see on the label of somebody trying to sell you some